In the endless gulf where dying stars burn like prayer candles, an imperial void cruiser drifted toward a forgotten system. Machine spirits hummed inside cathedral like corridors adorned with gilded saints and spires of iron. Beneath vaulting arches, Seraphis Vael knelt in silence. Before we descend into the chaos of this tale, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more legends and dark histories from the Warhammer 40K universe. Psychic flames flickered around armored shoulders as incense swirled in cooling eddies of recycled air. A librarian of the Adeptus Astartes, he served as both warrior and mystic, attuned to the warp's currents in ways few mortals could survive. The Emperor's aquila gleamed on ceramite breastplate, reflecting dim lumen strips. He was not alone. Cherub servitors flitted by with scrolls, servo skulls drifted with glowing eyes, whispering litanies from speakers embedded in bone. Seraphis had come here to meditate on a message whispered through the astronomicon, yet the darkness pressed back. In his mind an ache began, a pressure unlike the tides of warp storms or the voices of demons. It was a hunger, a memory of pain older than the Emperor's throne, woven into the fabric of existence itself. On the edge of perception, he sensed something that was not a creature but an idea, a predatory memeplex that wore the name Nezarec. It moved through thoughts like a serpent in water, coiling around prayers and dragging nightmares into the waking world. Seraphis rose slowly, his armored fingers tracing ancient sigils etched into the deck. To his senses, the cruiser's machine spirit stuttered with subtle interference. Pic displays glitched for half a heartbeat, Vox relays squealed with distorted hymnals, and the ship's cogitators lost a nanosecond of processing. These were the symptoms of an infection that had no form, only pattern. Through the reinforced glass of a viewing port, the librarian saw a starless anomaly ahead. The void looked wrong, a wound where light bent inward, absorbing hope. The crew believed they were on routine patrol. Seraphis knew differently. He felt a call older than Terra, emanating from that nothingness. He could not refuse. With calm certainty, he summoned his power, psychic energies coiling like burning serpents around his fingertips. In distant holds, members of the ship's company continued their tasks unaware of the cosmic significance of their passage. Munitorum adepts logged munition crates, engineers chanted binaric prayers over humming plasma coils, and serfs scrubbed oil from deck plating. Above them all, the librarian took his first steps toward an encounter that would rewrite the rules of survival. The silent weight of destiny settled on the vessel, pressing down as if the void itself had mass. The Emperor's angels had faced demons, xenos, and traitors, but nothing prepared them for an invasion of pure concept. Seraphis reached for his force staff, the weapon's head glowing faintly as it resonated with his will. The anomaly expanded across the view, its edges shimmering like torn parchment. Every fiber of his being told him to flee, yet duty demanded he advance. Under his breath, he recited the catechism of protection, layering psychic wards around his soul. Beyond the hull, the void swallowed all light, and within that shadow something ancient waited. This awareness threaded through the cruiser's corridors, creeping past barriers of faith and steel, slipping into minds that had never known doubt. It promised power without sacrifice, knowledge without price, an end to pain. As it brushed against Seraphis, he felt the universe exhale, and with it the first hint of sorrow. The moment hung, heavy and expectant, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Then, like a whisper carried on a cold wind, came the invitation that would draw an entire galaxy into a nightmare. The librarian's eyes closed briefly as he stepped forward, the decision made. Nothing would ever be the same again. At the threshold of new understanding, the section ended with foreboding weight, ushering the reader onward. The cruiser's prows sliced into the anomaly with the inevitability of tectonic plates grinding. Hull groaned, Vox arrays flared with static. In the bridge, Captain Hallex barked orders, his command cloak fluttering as alarms pulsed. Crew members recited the litany of staying to calm the spirits of augur systems that screeched in protest. The starfield outside twisted, becoming a wash of bruised colors and impossible geometry. As if entering a canyon carved into space, the vessel slid between walls of nothingness. Seraphis felt pressure build within his skull. The predatory memeplex was here, not as flesh but as geometry and vibration. Nezarec was an absence given presence. His essence saturated the environment, like a scent clinging to cloth. The librarian's thoughts were not his own. Memories of ancient sieges flickered alongside images of moons torn apart by hands unseen. The smell of ozone mingled with the metallic tang of fear. Around him, simple crewmen gripped railings, eyes widened, breaths shallow. They had never trained for this kind of encounter. They heard whispers in languages they did not speak. Childhood fears resurfaced, petty jealousies flared, and in the Vox, someone laughed with a voice that was not present. Seraphis moved through the bridge like a specter, his awareness split between physical and psychic realms. He sensed data streams being rewritten by an alien line. Binary prayers to the machine god were answered by silence. Numbers on auspex displays subtly shifted, aligning in patterns that matched no imperial code. Every flicker of light might be a message. He touched a cogitator's casing, feeling through the metal into the circuits, attempting to stabilize them with his will. The machine's spirit responded like a panicked animal, bucking against his mind. Beneath his armored boots, vibrations rippled, as if the ship passed over unseen waves. Meanwhile, beyond the void, Nezarec whispered of the collapse of the fall of human empires in other universes. The final god of pain had been present at catastrophes long forgotten, feeding not on bodies but on despair. He promised to share secrets if only Seraphis would listen. The librarian anchored his thoughts in memories of his chapter's fortress monastery, the cool scent of stone, the resonance of chants in basalt halls. He would not be lured by offers of forbidden knowledge. Through grit and focus, he maintained self while glimpsing the edges of a narrative far grander than his own. The void manifested shapes within shapes. A face appeared in the distortion, only to dissolve. A hand reached through bulkheads, promising release, yet when touched it became frost. The crew's fear grew palpable. It threatened to cascade into hysteria. With calm certainty, Seraphis began a measured chant. Words resonated through metal, carrying authority derived from the Emperor's will. He spoke of duty, sacrifice, and the sanctity of the human soul. The mimetic predator recoiled, not from the words themselves, but from the unity they inspired. For Nezarec thrived in isolation, in the silence of despair. Unity was resistance. Slowly, order returned to the bridge. Instruments stabilized, rails ceased shuddering. The anomaly outside remained, but the ship held course. In those heartbeats, the predatory idea tasted the willpower of Astartes and learned caution. This encounter would not be like the collapse, where billions died without understanding their enemy. Here, in the gothic horror of Warhammer's future, there were warriors hardened by eternal warfare. The final god of pain would need new strategies. Seraphis knew instinctively that this was only the beginning. The cosmic canyon ahead promised landscapes and horrors crafted from thought and memory. He could feel its edges pressing against his mind, urging him forward. Behind him, the crew drew strength from his presence, not realizing the depth of the abyss into which they all now descended. As the ship plunged deeper, engines burning with unnatural vigor, the librarian felt a chill not of temperature but of recognition. His enemy had no face, no body, only intent. This intent would test the very definition of survival. He gathered his robes, closed his eyes, and walked deeper into the steel corridors, leaving behind the safety of command to seek the source. The narrative flowed like oil over metal, smooth yet heavy, preparing for the next descent. Past the bridge, the cruiser's interior took on a life of its own. Hallways that once obeyed the layout of naval doctrine now bent at impossible angles. Piping wept oily tears. Flickering lumen strips cast inconsistent shadows that seemed to move with deliberate intent. Seraphis walked through this shifting labyrinth with caution, his armor scraping against walls that pulsed like muscle. Here, the predatory memeplex was rewriting reality. Nezarec's presence manifested as architecture. Doors opened onto vistas of worlds never visited, glimpses of cities consumed by fire and replaced by monochrome plains. Images flickered in the corner of his vision, sobs of children drowned by flood, screams of soldiers trapped in airless voids. Each was a memory of pain and fear, nourishment for the entity that now intruded upon the galaxy. He understood then why Nezarec was called the final god of pain. Not because he inflicted wounds in flesh, but because he catalyzed suffering until it became a story that transcended the individual. The corridor ended at a chamber that had not existed before. It was vast, a vault where rib-like supports of ferrocrete arched high overhead. At its center, a dais of rusted iron held a massive sarcophagus bound by chains. Skulls decorated its surface, and candles guttered in the stale air, their flames burning with sickly green light. Around the chamber, murals told stories in a style alien yet painfully familiar. A golden age shattered by darkness, an invasion of shadows tearing life from worlds, a collapse of civilizations at the whim of an idea. These images matched none of the known histories of the Imperium. They belonged to another universe entirely, the one where guardians fought for light against the witness. Seraphis approached the sarcophagus, his force staff held at guard. There was no sense of life within, yet the psychic pressure intensified. His breath formed plumes even though the air was warm. When he touched the cold metal, visions flooded him. He saw pyramids that sailed through void like islands, their hulls dark and angular. Inside them, beings of smoke and geometry congregated around a throne carved from compressed suffering. On the throne sat a figure draped in concept, a shape that flickered between terrifying beauty and blasphemous abstraction. Its eyes were stars collapsing, its voice was a choir of despair. It called itself Nezarec. It spoke of the root of nightmares, of wars fought with dreams as weapons. It offered Seraphis a place at its side if he would open the sarcophagus and release what was bound within. Under his breath, he recited a mantra of refusal. Loyalty anchored him. He remembered the sacrifice of Sanguinius, the death of legions on Terra's walls, the burning eyes of the emperor. He reminded himself that some doors must remain sealed. At that thought, the sarcophagus shifted. Chains rattled. A crack appeared along its lid, oozing light the color of bruises. The final god laughed not from the coffin, but within the librarian's mind. Each laugh was a blade scraping bone. Around Seraphis, the murals began to animate. Figures of guardians turned, their faces showing despair. Black pyramids drifted, emanating suffocating dread. The librarian realized he was being offered a choice: release the unknown and risk doom, or seal it forever and incur Nezarec's wrath. There would be no easy path. He placed his hand on the lid, ready to push with psychic strength to keep it closed. Pain lanced through him, not physical but emotional, memories of every soul he had failed to save in centuries of war. Each regret sharpened by the final god. Tears he had never allowed to fall now burned his cheeks. Strength came from an unexpected source. Through the walls of the cruiser, a hymn rose, sung by serfs and soldiers. The melody was simple, a children's lullaby repurposed as a prayer. It told of stars that guide, of hope found in dark places. In that gentle song, Seraphis found a fulcrum. With calm certainty he pushed. The crack closed, chains tightened. The sarcophagus went still. Nezarec did not retreat. It studied him now, curious. The battle had not been won, it had not even begun, but he had refused the first temptation. In the stillness that followed, he felt more than his own will. He felt the will of countless humans, defiant in the face of endless night. He turned away from the chamber, leaving behind the sealed horror. As he stepped through the door, the murals returned to stone, the sarcophagus fading as if never there. The cruiser's corridor straightened again, though subtle warps remained. He continued onward, aware that each step brought him deeper into a narrative of cosmic scale. The emotional weight of the chamber lingered, carrying readers into the next scene with quiet dread. The anomaly's influence extended beyond physical spaces. It whispered at the edges of vision, embedding itself in patterns of data and idle thought. Seraphis heard voices in the hum of ventilation fans and the soft clatter of servitors' mechanical limbs. Once he passed a group of armsmen reciting the litany of calm, their eyes closed as they swayed. Their hymn wavered and shifted mid-verse, morphing into a lullaby from old Terra that none of them had learned. They stopped confused, lips moving without sound. He realized that Nezarec was testing how far it could push before shattering minds. It sought gaps, cracks through which to insert itself, Not every soul was built like an Astartes. Many aboard the cruiser lacked psychic shields. Seraphis felt responsible for them. The crew's suffering would feed the predator if he failed. He quickened his pace. Beyond the munitions deck, the smell of promethium thickened. He entered an engine shrine where massive plasma coils pulsed with contained sunfire. Engine seers in red robes chanted binaric code. One figure stood apart, his cogitator harness linking directly to the plasma core. Magos Threnix was ancient even by Mechanicum standards. Cables emerged from his skull, his flesh replaced by brass and ceramite. His eyes were lenses through which no human emotion passed. When he turned to Seraphis, his voice modulated like harmonic distortion. He spoke of anomalies in the machine spirit's song, patterns inserted where none should be, equations describing entropy rewritten into forms unknown. The librarian listened, understanding that Nezarec was attempting to graft itself into the ship systems by rewriting base code. The tech priest asked if a demon of chaos was aboard. Seraphis replied that the presence was older, not of the warp, but of pure idea. The Magos whispered of forbidden archives that spoke of mimetic entities, ideas that lived and prayed. He confessed quietly that the Omnissiah had once warned of such things, but those warnings were considered myth. In the background, plasma coils crackled like voices whispering secrets. The conversation between man and machine created a rhythm that almost drowned out Nezarec. Almost. With calm certainty, Seraphis and Threnix combined their disciplines. The librarian wove psychic wards into the circuitry, chanting liturgies of purity. The Magos imprinted machine code countermeasures, rewriting subroutines to reject non-mechanical patterns. It was like attempting to program out a haunting. Each time they sealed one access point, the mimetic predator found another, more subtle path. They realized this would be a war of attrition fought across thought and metal. As they labored, Seraphis noticed shapes moving in the reflections of copper pipes. Figures wearing armor he did not recognize, helmets shaped like the skulls of ancient predators. They moved with fluid grace, swords humming with power. These were not Astartes. They were guardians from another universe, glimpsed across the gulf. He saw one raise a hand, palm out, as if to warn him. Then the image vanished. Nezarec laughed softly, a sound like glass fracturing. It teased him with glimpses of those who had faced it before and failed. He clenched his teeth, continued working. Each key pressed by the Magos, each syllable uttered by the librarian, was an act of defiance. They created a web of logic and faith inside the engine systems, a mesh through which the predatory idea would find it harder to pass. Not impossible, but difficult. That was all they could hope for. Through the Vox network, reports came of nightmares spreading through the lower decks. Crewmen attacked each other in delusional fury. A serf had tried to open an airlock because she thought she saw her lost child outside. The entity was learning which memories hurt most. Seraphis realized he could not be everywhere. He could only strengthen minds and systems enough to slow the infection, to buy time for a counterstrike he had yet to conceive. He turned from the engine shrine, leaving the Magos to continue the machine wards. The sound of binary prayer faded behind him. Ahead lay the starboard sanctum, where chaplains conducted rites. He hoped to find stronger defenses there. The narrative shifted like a shadow across a wall, promising to reveal the predator's next stratagem. In the starboard sanctum, Gothic architecture enfolded a chamber dedicated to the Emperor's glory. Stained glass windows depicted battles in hues of crimson and gold. Gene-wrought candles flickered atop reliquaries. Incense hung thick, mixed with oil from the chainswords blessed at the altar. At the center, Chaplain Malacher addressed a gathering of armsmen and serfs. His skull helm gleamed, Crozius Arcanum hung from his gauntlet. His voice was a deep chant, weaving faith into stone. The crew repeated his words, their voices overlapping until the chamber hummed with resonance. Sound became armor. When Seraphis entered, he felt the pressure in his skull ease. Faith created its own psychic field, a fortress of belief. Nezarec recoiled here. The final god fed on pain and despair. It found little to consume in collective devotion. Yet the predator did not retreat, it sought to corrupt. As the chaplain spoke of sacrifice, subtle whispers attempted to interject, twisting meaning. A phrase about honor became a memory of betrayal. A verse about salvation turned to images of abandonment. Seraphis added his voice to the litany, harmonizing psychic resonance with spoken word. Together, librarian and chaplain created a chord that rang like a bell across the warp. It hurt the mimetic entity in ways it had not anticipated, for an idea can be opposed by another idea. The chant evolved. It became not a rote recitation, but a story. Malacher began to speak of heroes who had faced impossible odds and yet stood firm. He told of Sanguinius at the Eternity Gate, of unnamed guardsmen holding the line on distant worlds. Each anecdote resonated with those listening, embedding a narrative of resilience that Nezarec could not easily consume. Stories were weapons, too. The Predator responded with visions. Some crew members saw loved ones lost to war, arms outstretched, whispering to be followed into light. A few faltered, tears streaking soot-smudged cheeks. Malacher reached them, placing his armored hand on their heads, grounding them in the here and now. Seraphis used his psychic senses to shield minds, sliding protective wards into the spaces between thoughts. The process was exhausting. Sweat beaded his brow despite rebreather vents. His fingertips tingled with raw energy, but they could not stop, for the mimetic predator shifted tactic mid-right. It began using sound. Echoes in the stone grew disharmonious, reflecting the chant back on itself with subtle distortion. The timing of prayers faltered, voices lost rhythm. If allowed, the distortion would unravel the resonance they had created. Seraphis adjusted his tone, lengthening certain syllables, compressing others. Malacher matched him instinctively. Together, they steered the chant back into harmony. The crew followed. The sonic architecture became fluid, adapting to interference. It was like surfing a wave of sound, while beneath them a predator attempted to drag them under. The librarian sensed admiration from Nezarec. It learned quickly, but so did humans forged in war. The rite concluded not with a triumphant shout, but with a long exhalation, a sigh of shared relief. In that release, the entity tasted contentment, a flavor strange to it. It pulled back slightly, reassessing. Seraphis used that moment to speak plainly. He told the assembly that something ancient and immaterial had invaded. He explained that fear was its weapon. He urged them to hold on to faith, to support one another, to resist despair. They listened, understanding more than he expected. They were souls born to endless war. The concept of an unseen enemy was familiar. They nodded, gripped weapon hafts, whispered prayers. As they dispersed, Malacher clasped Seraphis's arm. His skull mask hid his expression, but his voice carried grim. He warned that what they faced could not be fought with bolters alone. They would need resilience of mind and spirit. Seraphis agreed. He sensed the predator listening, curious about this new element called faith. The next engagement would test different facets of their defiance. The chapter ended with the weight of purpose settling over them all, guiding the narrative forward. Sleep was a luxury seldom afforded to Astartes, but Seraphis understood that to fight a battle in the mind he needed rest. He retreated to his cell, a narrow space with a steel cot and a small shrine to the emperor. He removed his helm, letting recycled air wash over scarred features. Closing his eyes, he entered a meditative trance, his consciousness descending through layers of memory. In dreams, Nezarec struck with renewed ferocity. The final god did not waste time on subtle infiltration. It conjured entire worlds. Seraphis found himself standing on a landscape of broken machines and twisted architecture. Monolithic spires floated in stormy skies, connected by chains of lightning. At their base, figures moved, guardians of Destiny's Sol system, exotic armor glowing with light. He recognized them from legends he had glimpsed earlier. They fought creatures of shadow with weapons that fired arcs of solar energy and void light. The sound of battle echoed like thunder. Amid the chaos stood Nezarec, not the abstraction glimpsed in visions, but a towering figure of bone and sinew, wrapped in cloth that fluttered without wind. Horns curved from a skull devoid of eyes, and his mouth stretched into a rictus that suggested laughter or agony. Around him, reality buckled. He wielded nightmares as weapons, projecting pain into the minds of those who opposed him. guardians fell, their ghosts unable to resurrect them under his influence. The dream turned, shifting across time. Seraphis now walked through a place of open plains under dark clouds. Tyranid bioships rained spore pods into trenches manned by guardsmen. Explosive shells burst, ichor spraying, bodies falling. He watched as gene stealers ripped through lines. In the midst of this horror, he saw Nezarec again, floating above the battlefield like a specter. He whispered into the ears of humans and xenos alike, urging them to embrace despair. Some guardsmen dropped their lasguns, hands covering ears, screaming. Others fired at their own comrades. The tyrannids seemed unaffected, but their actions grew more frenetic, as if the predatory memeplex had incited deeper aggression. The dream shifted once more. Now Seraphis stood on an urban world, towering hive spires rising into hazy air. Chaos cultists chanted around glowing sigils. Warp portals opened, demons poured forth. At the center, Nezarec orchestrated the symphony of horror, conducting with slender fingers. Each scream, each betrayal, each act of cruelty fed him. He turned his skull toward Seraphis and spoke not in words but in sensation. I am the inevitability of your darkest thought. Why fight what you cannot kill? The librarian responded within the dream, not with an argument but with an image. He conjured the memory of a guardsman on Cadia who stood alone against a horde, buying time for evacuees. The man's lasgun overheated, his uniform smoldered, his body broke. Yet he refused to retreat. He smiled as he died. In that image, there was no despair, only duty. Nezarec recoiled slightly. It was not used to meeting defiance in the realm of dream. Seraphis pressed forward, filling the dream with similar memories. A sororita's sister burning her last drop of promethium to cleanse a plague. A tech priest staying behind to disable a reactor, his binary prayers continuing until the end. An orphan on a backwater world hiding her siblings during an orc raid and singing to them softly until help arrived. Each act of courage was a note in a song that Nezarec could not harmonize with. The predatory memeplex snarled, and the dream collapsed. Seraphis awoke sweating, fists clenched. He realized he had not slept at all but had wrestled with an idea within his own mind. Yet he also understood that dreams were battlefields. Nezarec would attack there repeatedly, and each time he would need to meet it with stories of resilience. He rose, donning his helm. There would be no more rest. Outside, Vox traffic increased. Reports came that the cruiser had exited the anomaly into a region of space devoid of stars. Instead, there was a structure. In the distance, a colossal construct hung suspended, a black pyramid reminiscent of those seen in dreams. Reality, it seemed, had begun to mirror nightmares. Seraphis headed to the hangar. The battle was about to enter a new phase. The section closed with the gravity of impending confrontation heavy in the air. In the primary launch bay, Thunderhawk gunships sat ready, their hulls painted red and black, adorned with purity seals. Servitors loaded ammunition belts while tech marines conducted last checks. The air smelled of lubricants and ozone. Seraphis walked among his brothers, each armored giant preparing for assault. They were the Emperor's angels, transhuman beings who had faced every kind of nightmare, yet the sight of the pyramid outside the docking field filled even them with unease. Its angles offended the eye. It seemed to exist in more dimensions than space allowed. A ramp lowered with hydraulic hiss, and Captain Hallex emerged, flanked by a command squad. He announced that the cruiser's mission had changed. Instead of routine patrol, they would board the alien structure to assess and, if possible, neutralize whatever threat lay within. The ship's machine spirit could not plot a course away. Nav charts failed to recognize coordinates. They were caught. Boarding was the only way forward. Seraphis joined the lead squad. Thunderhawk engines roared to life, filling the bay with deafening vibration. Ramps closed, mag locks clamped. Within the gunship, interior lights flickered red. Marines locked harnesses, checked bolters, and intoned battle oaths. The librarian closed his eyes briefly, aligning his mind for the incursion. The Thunderhawk lifted, the deck dropping away as they exited the cruiser's void shields. Outside, the black pyramid loomed, its surface etched with glowing patterns. It resonated at frequencies that made stomachs churn. As they approached, parts of its hull opened like wounds, revealing passages large enough for gunships. The final god of pain was inviting them in. The landing bay inside the pyramid was a cavern of stone and light. Struts and ribs of unknown alloy arched overhead. Strange plants glowed with bioluminescence in niches. Faint whispers echoed, suggesting vast spaces beyond. As the Thunderhawk touched down, armored boots met alien stone. Immediately the air grew heavy. Psychic pressure compressed thoughts, making it difficult to distinguish between one's own mind and intrusive suggestions. The mimetic predator was stronger here. Seraphis felt tendrils of concept brush against him, trying to insert false memories. He recited the catechism of unyielding flesh. His brothers formed a perimeter, bolters ready. Captain Hallex gave hand signals and squads advanced. Their boots echoed on floor plates that pulsed like heart muscle. The architecture changed with every turn. Some corridors resembled cathedral aisles with ribbed columns and vaulted ceilings. Others were tubes lined with pulsing veins. Gravity fluctuated unpredictably, causing disorientation. At junctions, they encountered creatures unlike any recorded in imperial bestiaries, shadows that moved independently of bodies, beings composed of shards of darkness held together by static, humanoid silhouettes whose edges flickered. These entities did not attack immediately, they watched. The Astartes moved like an inexorable tide, bolters raised. When the first shadow lunged, it moved with impossible speed, flickering past barrel lines. Bolter fire stitched lines of explosive death through the air. Some rounds passed through immaterial bodies harmlessly, others detonated, scattering fragments of darkness that melted back into floors. The Marines adapted quickly, switching to plasma and melta for maximum effect. Seraphis used his force staff to channel warp lightning, arcs of blue-white energy that disrupted the cohesion of shadow creatures. He sensed intelligence behind their movements, a guiding force. Nezarec was testing them, probing their tactics. The deeper they went, the more the environment resembled an organic labyrinth. Floors gave way to soft tissue underfoot, walls breathed. The smell of copper grew stronger. Through it all, whispers urged them to surrender, to lay down arms and accept the inevitability of pain. Captain Hallex countered by reciting battle honors. He named worlds they had saved, enemies they had purged, innocents they had shielded. Each name was a defiant spark in the gloom. As they moved deeper, they found a passage that descended, lined with ribs that flexed like gills. A low hum emanated from below, resonating with bone. Seraphis recognized the rhythm. It matched the heartbeat of something vast. He knew without seeing that they were approaching the root of this nightmare. The mimetic predator's core awaited them. He sensed a mixture of curiosity and anticipation radiating from that direction. Nezarec was eager to meet those who would challenge its dominion in this form. The descent felt like dropping into the throat of a beast. Each step reverberated. The librarian braced himself for revelations that could unmake his sanity. The narrative tightened, leaving readers on the edge of a metaphysical precipice, about to plunge into unknown depths. At the base of the winding passage, the squad emerged into a chamber vast enough to hold titans. The floor was a reflective pool of viscous fluid, glistening like spilled ink, lit from beneath by pulses of faint crimson. Above, the ceiling vanished into shadow. At the center, a pillar of light rose, composed of swirling patterns that evoked both data streams and DNA helices. It pulsed with a rhythm that matched the heartbeat heard earlier. Within the light, a shape coalesced, a figure tall and thin, horns curving upward, limbs draped in tattered cloth. Nezarec manifested not as material but as a construct of concept. His form shifted with each pulse, sometimes skeletal, sometimes amorphous. Eyes that were not eyes opened across his body, each one reflecting a different tragedy from history. When he spoke, his voice bypassed ears and echoed inside minds. He greeted Seraphis by name, though they had not exchanged one. He asked how it felt to be a warrior of a god who could not prevent suffering. He wondered if Seraphis ever questioned why endless war was the Emperor's gift to mankind. The librarian answered with silence. Words would only feed the predator. Instead, he reached out with his mind, channeling psychic might through his force staff. Blue fire coiled around the librarian, arcs of power leaping toward Nezarec's form. Lightning struck the pillar, causing ripples. Nezarec laughed, the sound like shattering marble. Energy passed through him without harm. The final god of pain was not bound by physical or warp laws, he existed in thought. Captain Hallex ordered heavy weapon teams to fire. Plasma cannons, melta-beams, crack missiles, all converged on the center. Explosions sent waves across the viscous pool, showers of glowing droplets. For a moment, Nezarec flickered as if static spread through his form. Then he recomposed himself, the attack's energy absorbed into his pattern. He congratulated the Marines for their courage, then asked what they would do when their weapons proved ineffective. He offered them a vision of a future where pain was an illusion and war was replaced by eternal contemplation of despair. Seraphis concentrated, drawing on the shared memories of his chapter. He saw his Primarch's sacrifice, the Emperor's terrible power, the resilience of humanity. He used these as anchors, forging a blade of thought. With calm certainty, he plunged this blade into the concept that was Nezarec. The final god screamed, not audibly, but through a vibration that shook the pyramid. For the first time, something had wounded him. Ideas could harm ideas, specifically the idea that pain could be met with purpose. Seraphis realized that while Nezarec thrived on purposeless suffering, he had a weakness. The predator struggled to consume agony that was given meaning. Soldiers dying so others might live did not feed him as much as people abandoning hope. The librarian shared this realization with his brothers through a short phrase transmitted via mindlink. Instantly, they adjusted. In their thoughts, they reframed their fear and pain as sacrificial acts. Each moment of doubt became an offering to the Emperor. Nezarec recoiled further. His form destabilized. The eyes across his body flickered, some closing. He unleashed a counterattack, not with claws but with memories. He flooded their minds with images of worlds they had failed, civilians lost, comrades falling, mistakes that cost lives. For the Astartes, these were indeed painful. They were trained to feel guilt deeply, but now they held those memories as part of their duty, not sources of despair but reminders to fight harder. They accepted them. This acceptance hardened their resolve. Nezarec's weapon turned dull. The predatory memeplex screamed again, a keening wail that shook stone. In desperation, he reached into the warp proper, drawing on powers akin to chaos. The chamber darkened, shadows became solid, whispers became shrieks, the air grew cold as ice. Demon faces emerged from the fluid floor, jaws snapping. The Marines pivoted, chainswords roaring, bolters barking. Even as they fought physical manifestations, Seraphis maintained focus on the concept war. He continued to stab with his thought blade, each strike a statement. Pain is not the final word. With each assertion, Nezarec diminished. The figure's horns cracked, the cloth shredded, eyes closed permanently. He did not die, ideas rarely do. He retreated, withdrawing into the pillar's core. As he dissipated, he left behind a warning. The final god of pain would return, perhaps not in this galaxy, perhaps not as this shape, but his essence was eternal. Seraphis understood. One cannot kill fear permanently. One can only confront it each time it arises. When the last echo faded, the pillar dimmed. The viscous pool solidified into black stone. The chamber's oppressive pressure lifted. The librarian sagged but did not fall. He had fought an idea and survived. Captain Hallex signaled for withdrawal. As the squad retraced their path, shadows no longer attacked. The pyramid seemed to exhale, its hostility ebbing. Outside, the void still loomed, but the path back to the cruiser was clear. They had won a battle, not the war. Still, the weight of the encounter lingered, a quiet tension carrying into the next chapter. The Thunderhawks exited the pyramid, engines roaring as they climbed toward the cruiser. Through the cockpit canopy, Seraphis saw the anomaly shrinking behind them. The pyramid's glow dimmed, its edges dissolving like mist. In the distance, real stars gleamed. The librarian allowed himself a breath of relief, yet within the warp, ripples spread. The final god's retreat had not gone unnoticed. Entities that lurk beyond reality's veil sensed a breach, a disturbance. On board Astropath Lion, a thin figure draped in robes and covered in scarred runes convulsed. Her eyes, milky from blindings, rolled back. She slammed her staff down, transmitting urgent messages in choir frequencies. Her mind touched the edges of something that even she could not fully comprehend. Her scream was soundless, a psychic wail that resonated through the ship. Seraphis felt it like ice water poured down his spine. He rushed to the choir chamber, where other astropaths were in similar distress. Their golden caskets hummed, side-conductive tubing glowing. Lion grasped his hand with surprising strength. Without words, she conveyed images. Warp currents twisted, new eddies forming. The great ocean shuddered as if a massive predator swam through it. Chaos gods turned their gazes. More importantly, something far older responded. From beyond the galactic rim, he sensed tendrils of the tyranid hive mind stirring. The hive fleet recognized the disturbance as potential prey. Nezarec's mimetic wave would attract many hungry eyes. Lion's message did not stop. She showed him glimpses of worlds light years away. On a desert planet where ancient pyramids lay half-buried, the sand shifted as if creatures buried for eons awakened. On a shrine world in the segmentum solar, pilgrims began whispering in languages they did not know, their prayers turning to odes of sorrow. On a space hulk drifting near the maelstrom, a cult that worshipped pain suddenly started screaming in ecstasy, believing their god had spoken. The final god's retreat had seeded echoes throughout the warp. Seraphis realized that though they had pushed the entity back locally, his essence had touched minds across the galaxy. He would not manifest physically again soon, but his influence would linger, inspiring cults, fueling nightmares, sowing seeds that might bloom centuries hence. With calm certainty, he met Lion's gaze and projected strength back, offering her anchor in the storm. The astropath's breathing steadied. She nodded, wiped blood from her nose, and resumed her duties. The librarian left the choir chamber heavy with new responsibility. In the stratagem, Captain Hallex convened his officers. Holographic displays showed the cruiser's position relative to Imperial territory and the anomaly. They had recorded as much data as possible. The Mechanicum would want to study the pyramid's remnants. The Inquisition would demand answers. Seraphis warned that Nezarec was not truly gone. He described their battle in conceptual terms, emphasizing that stories and meanings were weapons against him. The officers listened, some skeptical but unable to refute the evidence of the psychic distress still echoing through the ship. Malacher suggested increasing chaplaincy presence among crew for the foreseeable future. The Magos proposed isolating data systems from certain frequencies. They all agreed that warning the wider Imperium was paramount. As the cruiser turned on its new heading, engines flaring to break free of the anomaly's grip, Seraphis stood at a viewing port. Stars seemed close enough to touch, brilliant against the void. He thought of the Guardians he had glimpsed in dreams, of their fight against the Witness and its disciples. He wondered if Nezarec had been fully defeated in their universe or if the Predator still lurked. He felt an unexpected kinship with those distant warriors, though their paths might never cross. He understood that in the grim darkness of the far future, countless entities sought to feed on humanity's pain. Some were demons, some were xenos, some were ideas. The war against despair was eternal. As he contemplated this, a new alarm sounded. Gellar fields fluctuated. The warp coiled outside like a living thing. He sensed something huge moving through. The hive mind's interest was manifesting. The tyrannids were altering course. To them, the pyramid's signature was like a pheromone. They would converge on this region, drawn by curiosity and hunger. A new threat approached, its scale immeasurable. Seraphis did not flinch. He called for readiness. His mind shifted from esoteric battles to physical ones. Chainswords would be needed now. The narrative pivoted, leaving behind metaphysical confrontation to prepare for visceral combat against an all-too-real swarm. The transition held a tension that carried into the subsequent tale. Moments after the Gellar fields pulsed, the ship's auger arrays detected mass shadow signatures blooming at system edges. Hundreds, then thousands. Icons representing bioships appeared on hololithic displays, their trajectories converging. The hive fleet approached like a tide of hunger. The anomaly's disturbance had drawn them as blood draws sharks. Captain Halleck's ordered red alert. Klaxons blared, Vox speakers crackled. On the gunnery decks, voidsmen raced to macro cannon batteries. Tech priests interfaced with lance turrets. Flight crews scrambled to their craft. The librarian took his place among the command echelons, but knew his duties would soon shift to the battle line. The hive mind extended feelers through the warp. Seraphis felt it like a pressure building behind his eyes. It was a collective intelligence, ancient and relentless, concerned only with assimilation, yet he detected curiosity within its hunger. The tyrannids had tasted many biospheres, but Nezarec's memetic signature was new. They wanted to study it, to integrate it. The thought of a swarm combining its physical adaptability with a predator of concepts chilled him. The final god of pain might have retreated, but his echo lingered like scent. If the tyrannids consumed it, who knew what horrors might emerge? The cruiser's cogitators calculated options. They could flee, perhaps outrun the nearest tendrils. But the warp currents were still unstable. The anomaly had altered local physics. They could stand and fight, but a single cruiser against a hive fleet was madness. They could attempt to lead the swarm away from populated systems by presenting themselves as bait. Hallex chose a middle path. They would transmit an astropathic warning to the nearest segmentum command while using every diversionary tactic to misdirect the swarm's vanguard. The astropath choir began chanting, their bodies glowing as they forced a message through turbulent warp. Seraphis added his mind, lending power to the transmission. Images of black pyramids, memetic dangers, and tyrannid trajectories were encoded and flung across light years. He prayed it would reach the right ears. Meanwhile, deck crews launched torpedoes loaded with chaff and false scent markers. These devices, created by the Magos in minutes using knowledge gleaned from tyrannid studies, released biochemical plumes replicating the memetic signature. They hoped to lure portions of the swarm away. The tactic worked partially. Some bioships altered course, following decoys. Others continued toward the cruiser. The first wave arrived within hours. Through void shields, Seraphis saw them, organisms the size of cities, bristling with spore chimneys and feeder tendrils. Their hides glistened with chitin, their eyes glowed. Smaller organisms clung to them like parasites, ready to be launched like artillery. Lance batteries fired, beams slicing through chitin. Macro cannons thudded, shells punching holes in hulls. The hits killed individual bioships, but the swarm kept coming. The void became a ballet of death, tracers crisscrossing in the darkness. Boarding torpedoes launched from the hive ships impacted the cruiser's shields, some punching through. Organic tunnels formed, spewing gaunts and gene stealers. Soon, the battle ceased to be at range. It became claws versus ceramite. Seraphis strode into a corridor where tyrannid warriors charged, scything talons ready. Bolter fire hammered them, explosive shells tearing limbs. The air filled with the screech of xenos and the roar of Astartes' battle cries. The librarian channeled warp energy, hurling bolts that incinerated carapace and burned synaptic nodes. Each fallen beast throbbed with life until a headshot ended it. He felt the hive mind pushing, adapting tactics on the fly. It sent larger creatures to absorb fire, smaller ones to flank, synapse organisms to coordinate. In a turret bay, Malachor swung his Crozius, shattering chitin and preaching even as he killed. Servitors died beside him, oil mixing with blood. In the engine shrine, Magos Threnix triggered machine spirits to overload pipes, incinerating infiltrating gaunts with superheated plasma. The cruiser became a labyrinth of death, echoing with gunfire and alien shrieks. Nezarec's influence had primed everyone to fear pain. Now physical pain filled the corridors, yet the crew fought on, turning fear into fuel. Seraphis felt something strange. As tyrannids died, he sensed their minds flicker with foreign concepts, echoes of Nezarec's voice. It seemed the hive mind's vanguard had tasted the memetic predator after all. These echoes manifested as slight hesitation, curiosity, even confusion in the normally single-minded swarm. The final god's essence was being digested. This could be exploited. Seraphis projected this discovery to his brothers. Perhaps they could seed new false ideas into the swarm, disrupting coordination. As he drove his force staff through the skull of a tyranid warrior, releasing a crackling jolt of energy, he considered how to weaponize memetics against a hive mind. The narrative moved quickly, weaving physical combat with conceptual warfare. It promised that the next section would explore this daring gambit, leaving readers with anticipation of mental and bodily struggle intertwined. Between volleys, Seraphis found brief moments to coordinate with Psyker adepts and the Magos. They gathered in a cordoned-off shrine, the smell of burning flesh thick. Through hololithic projections and mind links, they devised a plan. The Tyranid hive mind coordinated its swarm through synapse creatures broadcasting signals. If they could infect those signals with ideas antithetical to pure hunger, they might slow or confuse the hive. Nezarec's essence had already shown that ideas could cross into alien minds. Could they seed new narratives, stories that introduced doubt, hesitation, or even self-destruction? It was a dangerous gamble. They had little time. The librarian drew on his earlier confrontation. He distilled the essence of resistance into psychic form, the concept that pain could be purposeful, that sacrifice could be noble, that despair could be overcome. He created a thought construct, an image of a human standing against impossible odds, smiling into death, and imbued it with emotion. The Psyker adepts followed his lead, weaving around it chants and minor glamours. Magos Threnix modified Vox casters to emit frequencies that, when combined with psychic energy, could piggyback on synapse signals. They intended to broadcast the thought into the minds of Tyranid synapse beasts. In effect, they would commit memetic warfare. They could not know the outcome. The devices were hastily built, untested. If it failed, they would be overrun. If it succeeded, the hive might be momentarily paralyzed. With calm certainty, Seraphis initiated the broadcast. Psykers chanted, tech priests intoned binaric code. The thought weapon pulsed, invisibly yet tangibly, into the warp. Moments later, the effect rippled through the corridors. Seraphis felt it first. The tide of Tyranid bodies slowed. Gaunts hesitated mid-charge, heads cocking as if listening to something new. Warriors lifted scything arms, only to pause. Behind them, synapse creatures roared, confused. In the warp, Seraphis sensed the hive mind recoil. It had never encountered an idea like purpose in pain. For the swarm, existence had always been consumption. Doubt was foreign. He heard a psychic screech, then a low rumble as the hive mind attempted to purge the contamination. It responded by increasing synaptic output, trying to drown the idea. More creatures surged forward. The pause lasted only seconds, yet those seconds saved lives. Astartes and crew exploited the hesitation, firing bursts that thinned the enemy. In engineering, a tech marine sealed a breach just before Gaunts could swarm through. In the medici bay, a surgeon managed to stabilize a wounded trooper before a lictor could strike. Every heartbeat mattered. The Tyranids then adapted. The hive mind suppressed infected synapse creatures, severing their link and letting them fall lifeless. It withdrew its mind slightly, retreating behind layers of instinct. The thought weapon continued, but its effect lessened. Seraphis realized they had provoked the hive into a more cautious mode. They would not get another pause easily. He changed tactics, instructing psychers to refine the broadcast, targeting only certain frequencies. They would now attempt to sow discord within the swarm, pushing different broods to act at cross purposes. They imagined the concept of individual survival over collective. It was radical to a hive mind. The effect was subtle. Some Gaunts veered left when told to go right, colliding with others. Broods overlapped trajectories, causing minor delays, not enough to win outright but enough to slow momentum. Again, the hive adapted, isolating the interference. Yet each adaptation cost time. In war, time was victory. As the battle raged, Seraphis moved from corridor to corridor, fighting with staff and mind. He saw Marines die heroically, their names etched into his memory. He watched crewmen perform miracles of bravery. He sensed Nezarec's remnants whispering within Tyranid minds, adding chaotic notes to the orchestrated hunger. The predator's influence might cause long-term mutations within the swarm. He hoped the Imperium would never have to face those. Eventually, the swarm realized that this prey was not worth the cost. More ships turned away. The hive mind calculated return on biomass and altered course. The cruiser remained bruised but afloat. Boarding actions slowed. In the aftermath, corridors were lined with alien corpses, acid burns, and shattered armor. The survivors panted, exhaustion heavy. Seraphis leaned against a bulkhead, throat raw from chanting, muscles aching. He had fought with mind and body. His brothers clapped his shoulder, their respect tacit. The victory was not complete. The swarm still roamed the stars, but the immediate threat was gone. They had turned thought into a weapon and lived. The narrative took a breath, preparing to explore the consequences of mixing memetic predators with hive minds. The emotional resonance lingered, pulling the reader forward. In the days following the battle, the cruiser drifted toward friendly space. Damaged crews patched breaches, tech priests coaxed machine spirits back to humming compliance. The dead were honored, their bodies committed to the void with solemn rites. Chaplains recited prayers over each. The smell of incense and solvent mingled. During this respite, Seraphis found himself haunted by lingering thoughts. He sensed the traces of Nezarec within the minds of some survivors, not active infection, but subtle shifts. A voidsman who had lost an arm in the fight whispered that the pain was better than the emptiness he had felt before. A serf smiled through tears, saying suffering connected her to something greater. These were seeds of the final god's philosophy taking root. Seraphis feared what might grow. He sought out Magos Threnix and chaplain Malacher. Together, they discussed containment. Malacher argued that the seeds might be turned toward faith, harnessed into martyrdom. Threnix worried about memetic contamination of machine spirits. The librarian insisted that any thought aligned too closely with Nezarec must be purged. They agreed to monitor the crew closely. Malacher increased confessions and counseling. Threnix instituted logic tests for adepts. Seraphis drafted narratives emphasizing heroism rather than embrace of pain. He believed that if the crew framed their suffering as part of a larger purpose, the seeds would wither. Yet he was not wholly successful. In quiet corners, whispers spread of a new god who understood pain. Someone carved a symbol into a bulkhead, a horned skull wreathed in cloth. The predator's influence had become a religion. It was inevitable in a galaxy hungry for new faiths. Meanwhile, the Mechanicum prepared to study fragments of the pyramid recovered in the aftermath. Samples glowed with alien energies. Threnix advised caution. Some engineers salivated at the prospect of new technology. Seraphis warned them that the structure was made of concept as much as matter. Without understanding, they might unleash something worse. The Inquisition dispatched a ship. Agents boarded, demanded reports, quarantined sections, and interrogated crew. They were stern, their carapace armor gleaming. They suspected demon involvement. They suspected heresy. Seraphis told them the truth as best he could. They listened, unsatisfied, but aware that some threats defied codex classification. He knew they would monitor him. In the warp, ripples continued. The seeds of Nezarec's philosophy found receptive minds on distant planets. Some would use it to justify cruelty, others would find solace. Ideas cannot be contained easily. On a war-torn hive world, a gang leader who had lost everything carved Nezarec's symbol on his chest and declared himself disciple. On a feudal planet under orc attack, a noblewoman whispered a prayer to the final god before sacrificing herself to save her children. The idea mutated in every mind it touched. The tyranid hive mind, too, changed. Scouts reported that a splinter fleet exhibited strange behavior. Some organisms hesitated before killing, others turned on their own. The Inquisition labeled it an anomaly. They did not yet associate it with Nezarec. Seraphis realized they had unleashed something unpredictable. He took responsibility, though guilt weighed heavy. The narrative acknowledged that actions, even justified, have consequences rippling outward. The seeds would sprout, become flowers or thorns depending on who tended them. The librarian's journey would continue, but for now he walked among his crew, offering guidance, listening to pain, planting stories of resilience. The emotional tone softened. yet an undercurrent of dread remained, hinting that the final reckoning lay ahead. Weeks later, the cruiser translated back into real space near an Imperial fortress world. Defense stations hailed them, recognition signals exchanged, recovery operations commenced, docking clamps secured the battered vessel, medical teams boarded. The crew disembarked, greeted by authorities with both relief and suspicion. Seraphis met with an inquisitor named Varix, a gaunt man with piercing eyes and a scar across his scalp. Varix pressed for details, his tone clinical. He spoke of other reports of memetic anomalies spreading through the sector. He asked whether Seraphis believed Nezarec truly defeated. The librarian said no. He explained that the battle with Nezarec had been one engagement with a concept. The predator could manifest anywhere there was pain and despair. Varix frowned, taking notes. He mentioned rumors that some cult Mechanicus factions were experimenting with pyramid fragments. He asked whether Seraphis would lead a strike to ensure containment. The librarian agreed. He could not allow others to misuse what he had touched. Meanwhile, Chaplain Malacher recruited volunteers to go with him. They formed a new task force composed of Marines, Sisters of Battle, and inquisitorial stormtroopers. Each carried scars from previous battles, physical and mental. They prepared for a campaign against both physical enemies and ideas. Before departure, Seraphis stood upon a battlement overlooking the fortress world's defenses. Vast batteries of defense lasers pointed skyward, regiments drilled in the squares. He thought of the Guardians again, of their fight in another universe against similar pyramids. He wondered if the threads of destiny crossed, if perhaps some cosmic web linked those who resisted the Witness's disciples across realities. He felt small yet significant. He also thought of the tyranid fleet still moving, digesting ideas. He suspected they would evolve in unforeseen directions. Perhaps in some future, Astartes would fight a swarm that wielded weaponized despair. He shivered, not from cold but from the weight of possibilities. He whispered a prayer to the Emperor, to Sanguinius, to any force that would listen. Under his breath, he thanked the unknown guardians whose struggle had informed his. He prayed that humanity would learn to wield pain as fuel rather than let it consume them. Varix approached, informing him the ship was ready. They would depart at dawn. As the sun dipped behind battlements, casting long shadows, Seraphis knew he stood at a crossroads. He could retreat into safe ignorance, pretend the memetic threat was contained, or he could chase it, hunt it wherever it spread, becoming a storyteller as much as a warrior. He chose the latter. The chapter ended with the taste of resolve like iron, preparing readers for the next arc in his quest. Seraphis and his task force traveled from world to world, following whispers and coded reports of memetic infections. On a mining colony near a pulsar, they found miners carving Nezarec's symbol into tunnel walls, believing it would protect them from cave-ins. Seraphis convinced them that safety came from teamwork and proper bracing, not invocations to pain. On an agri-world, a crop blight had been blamed on a curse. Peasants flogged themselves in fields, hoping their suffering would appease a god. Sisters of Battle tended wounds, taught them of the Emperor's mercy, and burned the blighted fields to stop the spread. The blight ended, not because of pain, but because of decisive action. Each encounter reinforced that education and meaning were antidotes to Nezarec's influence, yet there were failures. On a hive world, an underhive cult had embraced the final god wholeheartedly. They kidnapped innocents, inflicted ritual pain, and spoke in whispers about the pyramid. When Seraphis confronted them, they refused to listen. Their leader, a man with eyes glazed by devotion, claimed that pain was the only truth. He held a shard of black pyramid that pulsed with malevolent light. The shard amplified his whispers, his words wormed into minds. In the ensuing battle, some of Seraphis's allies faltered, momentarily entranced by promises of relief from the ceaseless war. It took all of his psychic strength, combined with Malacher's faith, to break the cult's hold. They destroyed the shard, but not before some members escaped, carrying the ideology deeper into the hive. Seraphis realized that shards might be scattered across the sector, each a seed for a new cult. He vowed to find them all. In dreams, he sometimes heard Nezarec laugh softly. The final god seemed amused that his essence had become so prolific. He whispered that ideas could not be killed, only transformed. He thanked Seraphis for spreading his gospel inadvertently. The librarian responded by recounting stories of people saved, of pain transcended, of hope. These dreams became debates. Neither side won, but the librarian kept trying. On the feudal world of Valtus, he encountered an order of psychers who had devised their own method of resisting mimetic intrusion. They sang songs in ancient languages, each word a phonetic lock. Their leader, an elderly woman with hair white as bone, shared that she had glimpsed guardians in her dreams too. She believed that across universes, those who resisted the witness and Nezarec were connected by a thread of light. She told Seraphis to follow that thread. He felt humbled. Perhaps his fight was part of something larger than the Imperium, something universal. As he left Valtus, he saw children playing in a courtyard, chasing one another with sticks. One stumbled, scraping a knee. He paused, expecting tears. The child looked at the blood, then laughed, getting up. Pain did not always have to lead to despair. Sometimes it simply meant learning to be careful. He smiled behind his helmet. The narrative widened, showing that battles with ideas occurred everywhere. It promised to narrow again, focusing on a culminating confrontation that would test everything learned. The emotional cadence rose and fell like a tide, preparing for a storm. Rumors reached Seraphis of a shard of the pyramid within the Sol system itself. The fragment had been smuggled to Luna's dark side, hidden in the catacombs of an abandoned research outpost. If true, the presence of such a relic so close to Terra was unacceptable. The task force rerouted, slipping through security protocols under inquisitorial authority. Luna's silence greeted them. Craters glowed faintly under the light of Earth's reflected halo. The outpost was a maze of tunnels carved in basalt. Once it had been used for studies on warp-related anomalies. Now it was a crypt. Dust-coated consoles, servo skulls lay inert. Graffiti of the final god symbol marked walls at intervals, drawn with dried blood. A chill permeated the air, unnatural even for a place shielded from sunlight. Seraphis led his team deeper, Malachor beside him, Varix behind. They passed through vault doors that squealed on hinges, descending spiral stairs. Whispering grew audible, a susurrus that seemed to emanate from rock. The shard called to them. At the heart of the catacomb lay a chamber lined with ancient runes, circles of power once used to contain warp entities. In the center floated the shard, suspended in mid-air by unknown force. It was smaller than a fist, yet it radiated a presence vast as a world. Its surface mirrored their faces twisted in pain. Nezarec's laughter echoed faintly. Around the shard knelt figures in tattered robes. They turned slowly, revealing hollow eyes and mouths sewn shut. They had sacrificed tongues to silence their screams. Varix whispered a prayer, then fired. His bolt pistol barked, shells exploding heads. The cultists fell, but the shard pulsed. It transmitted a wave of despair. Knees weakened, hearts stuttered. Each person remembered their greatest regret. Malachor saw the brother he failed to save centuries ago. Varix saw a child he sacrificed for information. Seraphis saw a world burned because he arrived too late. The wave threatened to drown them. The librarian gripped his staff, forcing his mind above the tide. He focused on the opposite of regret, on lessons learned, lives saved because of those failures. He reached out, weaving psychic tendrils around the shard. He intended not to destroy it yet, but to understand its connection to Nezarec. Within, he sensed a link, a conduit across realities. Through it, the final god could peer into the heart of the Imperium. Destroying the shard might sever one path but leave others. Studying it might reveal how to trace Nezarec back to his source. Malachor shouted over the mental noise, urging destruction. Varix prepared charges. Seraphis hesitated. He saw guardians across an ocean of stars, grappling with their own shards. He saw them succeed by severing connections and by understanding them. He realized that he could not decide alone. He asked his companions without words. Malachor closed his eyes, weighing faith and risk. Varix calculated probabilities. Together they decided to destroy the shard. Some knowledge was too dangerous. They set charges, saying prayers to the Emperor. Seraphis infused them with psychic force. The explosion was controlled yet fierce. The shard shattered, releasing a scream. The sound was psychic, a tearing of a link. Across universes, Nezarec felt it. In that moment, the final god's attention turned fully to the Sol system. He had been annoyed by their interference. Now he was enraged. Seraphis felt his gaze like frost. The chamber shook, dust rained, walls cracked. Whispering became roaring. They rushed out as the catacomb collapsed behind them, sealing the shard's chamber under tons of lunar rock. Outside, the surface trembled. The librarian sensed Nezarec's presence receding, severed from this world, but the cost would be his wrath elsewhere. He accepted it, better to face an angry enemy than to hide from a patient one. The narrative escalated tension, hinting that the final god would mount a direct incursion next. The emotional tone tightened, drawing the reader toward an approaching climax. The destruction of the Luna shard sent a shock across realities. Nezarec, in his domain beyond time, recoiled then rallied. The final god of pain had lost a piece of himself. Rage replaced curiosity. He remembered Seraphis, the librarian who had wounded him in the pyramid and now dared to harm his essence on Terra's doorstep. Nezarec reached across the gulf between universes, focusing his predatory memeplex into a spear. He aimed not at the cruiser nor the fortress world, but at a place where humanity's hope coalesced, the Astronomicon. On Terra, the throne that held the Emperor's failing body blazed with psychic light, projecting a beacon guiding ships through the warp. Thousands of psychers died daily to feed it. If Nezarec could corrupt this beacon, he would plunge humanity into darkness, causing suffering on an unimaginable scale. Seraphis sensed the attack as a sudden dimming. Stars flickered, Gellar fields shuddered. Astropaths screamed. Even on worlds far from Terra, people felt an unease like a shadow passing over the sun. Varix received urgent orders. All psychers were to be mobilized in defense of the Astronomicon. The task force, though distant, could contribute by anchoring a psychic relay to buttress the beacon's defenses. They traveled to Mars, where a relay complex connected to Terra via noospheric links. Red sand storms whipped around towering auger masts. Skidara guards saluted. Tech priests led them to a chamber filled with cogitators humming like hives. Seraphis joined hands with psychers in a circle around a central glyph etched with shimmering metal. They would channel their collective will, projecting it along the relay to reinforce the Emperor's light. Nezarec's spear hit the Astronomicon like a shard of ice. Psychers convulsed, the beacon's light dimmed. On the relay station, consoles sparked, machine spirits squealed, alarms blared. The librarian braced, connecting his mind to the Emperor's radiance. He felt a warmth unlike any psychic energy he had wielded, a presence vast and kind. It did not speak but gave strength. Through this, Seraphis projected images of hope, of humanity surviving, of mothers embracing children, of soldiers sharing laughter. He offered Nezarec not pain but love. The contrast wounded the final god. Love had no meaning to him. It was a concept outside his predatory matrix. He recoiled, but his spear continued to press. The battle became a tug-of-war across the warp, with psychers anchored in relay stations across the Imperium pulling the Astronomicon's light toward them, and Nezarec pulling it toward darkness. Seraphis's mind burned. He felt neurons sizzle, nose bleed, muscles cramp. He pictured the Guardians again, their light fending off the darkness of the Witness. He borrowed that imagery, weaving golden arcs into his thought. Psychers next to him fainted, others died, blood seeping from eyes. Tech priests recited canticles, trying to stabilize the relay. Malachor prayed, his voice rough. Varix fired his faith as if it were a bolter hurling scripture into the warp. The Emperor's light flickered, then flared. In that flare, Seraphis saw the final god's spear crack. Nezarec screamed in frustration. The mimetic attack collapsed, shards falling away like dried scabs. The Astronomicon's beam reasserted itself, brightening. Ships lost in warp found bearings. Humanity exhaled. Nezarec retreated, wounded by concepts he could not comprehend. He vowed revenge, his whisper promising storms of despair. Seraphis collapsed, consciousness ebbing. He glimpsed the Emperor's light one last time, felt gratitude, and slept. The narrative reached its apex, the conflict between hope and despair playing out across cosmic scales. the emotional resonance peaked, leaving readers breathless and prepared for resolution. Seraphis awoke in an infirmary aboard a hospital ship orbiting Mars. Instruments beeped softly, the scent of disinfectant stung. His muscles ached, his mind felt wrung out like cloth. Malacher sat nearby, helm off, reading from a data slate. Varric stood by the door, arms folded. The Inquisitor informed him that the astronomicon held. Casualties numbered in the thousands, but the beacon never went out. The final god's assault had been blunted. Reports trickled in that across the Imperium, whispers of Nezarec had died down. Some cults dissolved, others went underground. The tyranid splinter fleet that had tasted his essence faltered, confused. It seemed the predator had withdrawn to lick his wounds. Varric congratulated Seraphis, then warned him. The Inquisition would remain vigilant. They would look for signs of memetic resurgence. He hinted that Seraphis might be called again, perhaps to serve as advisor on memetic threats. Malacher smiled, a rare sight. He said the librarian had turned pain into a weapon, had taught others to find meaning in suffering. Seraphis deflected praise. He knew he had not defeated Nezarec, only delayed him. Ideas do not die easily. They can resurface in new forms in new minds at times of weakness. Yet he felt hope. He had seen that love, duty, and sacrifice could wound a predator of pain. He had glimpsed connection across universes. He had felt the Emperor's light. He wondered if somewhere, guardians in another universe had felt his fight. Perhaps threads of fate intertwined. He rose, ignoring the ache, walked to a viewport. Mars' red surface glowed below, scarred by ancient impacts. Beyond, Earth shone blue and white, cradle of mankind, shielded by layers of defense and faith. He pressed his gauntlet to the glass. He whispered a quiet promise to remain vigilant, to tell stories of resilience, to teach others to see purpose in pain. He would continue to hunt shards, to counter whispers, to fight for meaning. The war against despair would never end, but each victory mattered. In the shadowed corner of the infirmary, a young medic smiled at a patient who had lost a leg. The patient laughed despite tears. Pain did not stop life, it simply changed it. Nezarec would never understand that. The narrative softened, shifting from high tension to reflection. It carried the reader toward a calm harbor after a storm, yet it did not deny the existence of future tempests. The emotional handoff was gentle, like dawn light warming cold stone. Years passed. Seraphis became known not only as a warrior but as a storyteller. He traveled widely, carrying the tale of the encounter with Nezarec. On distant worlds, he sat by fires, telling children about a god of pain defeated by unity. He did not glorify suffering. He explained that pain happens, but that it need not define one. He recited names of those who had fallen so that their sacrifices would be remembered. He inspired some to join the Astra Militarum, others to become healers. Memetic infections still occurred. Sometimes outposts reported whispers in darkness, sometimes cults reappeared. Each time, Seraphis responded with patience and purpose. He taught chaplains to weave resonance, magos to code defenses, psychers to craft thought weapons. He mentored a new librarian who had glimpsed a guardian in a dream. They talked at length about threads between universes. They speculated that Nezarec might one day return, perhaps changed, perhaps with allies. They prepared nonetheless. The tyrannids that had tasted Nezarec's essence mutated strangely. Some swarms exhibited behaviors that suggested rudimentary culture. A few displayed interest in art and pattern. The Inquisition watched warily. Seraphis wondered if even monsters could evolve beyond hunger. He hoped so. He also considered Nezarec's nature. The final god had called himself a memeplex, an idea that existed before most life. Perhaps he had been shaped by the witness, perhaps he had been free. Regardless, he now had a counterforce, a story of resistance. As long as someone told it, Nezarec could not wholly win. On a quiet night under a sky studded with stars, Seraphis sat with his friend Malacher, now old for an Astartes. They shared silence. Malacher asked if he feared death. Seraphis said no, he feared leaving pain without purpose. Malacher laughed softly. They watched a meteor streak. In another universe, a guardian punched through a pyramid, light blazing. The two did not know of each other, yet their actions resonated. The librarian closed his eyes, felt the warp, sensed faint echoes of other worlds. He whispered a thank you to unknown allies. The story ended not with a finality, but with a sense of continuation. The final god of pain still existed, but so did those who would oppose him. The grim darkness of the far future remained, but within it, sparks of hope burned. The legacy of Nezarec's invasion became a cautionary tale and a source of strength. The emotional handoff invited readers to imagine what might come next, to carry the story forward, to be part of the resistance in their own small ways. If you hunger for more tales of impossible encounters in the dark millennium, smash that subscribe button, and the Emperor protects those who support the channel.